begin.
Welcome to League of Our Own, a League of Legends talk show. I'm Pronago, and to my left or right, once again, anybody's guess, is Leo Tsukiyo.
What's up,
On this
everybody?
episode, we're going to be recapping the World's 2017 group stage before levying our predictions for playoffs. So how you doing, Leo?
I'm doing pretty splendid. A little disappointed at our not-so-immortals, but other than that, doing pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I mean, I got every group besides Group D wrong, but getting Group D right was the sweetest prize of them all, of course. I think I should have just outright won my pick'em right there and not had to gotten that championship ribbon skin, pawned off my League of Legends account for about 10 mil,
Definitely would have been sweet.
buy out an Immortals spot, because they didn't get kicked out of anything else yesterday.
I was actually going to save it for later whenever we discussed Group B. I was going to say Immortals did so bad their second week, right? Decided not to let them back in.
Out of order. It doesn't really matter. That's the thing, though. Isn't that such a disappointing end to their run that they go?
It is.
They do really decently, in the local split, right? And then they barely, arguably, failed to qualify for quarterfinals.
Yeah.
The second day, and now they've also failed to qualify for the NALCS, I guess. It was pretty interesting looking at the reactions of the players on Twitter because none of them had any idea.
Yeah, that was pretty unfortunate. And to be honest, I don't want to get too deep into the topic because I do have plenty of rant for this, considering how amazing an organization they've been in terms of success, growth, acquiring good staff, being very transparent with the public and things like that. So I'll leave that there. And then I'm not going to go deeper into it personally, but it's just really disappointing, actually, the fact that they're bowing out the way that they are from the World Tournament, specifically because, as we know coming into this Worlds, no team had ever gone 0-3 the first week and then made it out of their group. And now Fnatic got to do that primarily off the back of poor performances from Immortals,
Right.
And some surprise performances from Gigabyte Marines, which is because I'm not trying to take any credit away from them. I got to mention that because they did stupendously, all things considered, with some questionable tactics like the Mordekaiser, but we'll save that, I guess.
Well, I don't know, man. Maybe they were just thinking, okay, guys, this is the best team in the world. How are we possibly going to make this horrible experience of losing in 20 minutes or less a little bit more fun? I don't know. It's just troll pick. Fuck it.
Mordekaiser.
Actually, you know what? I really do appreciate Gigabyte Marines for picking Mordekaiser. And it's not for the reasons that maybe you think, like, oh, it's a pick that doesn't get seen too often. They lock in Mordekaiser, and you're like, wow, it's so cool. It's not a Cho'Gath. It's not a Maokai. It's not a brain dead tank that's going to fucking, I don't know, sit there for 15 seconds and have players be able to actually stop. Don't even need to play the game. I could just do go photo shoot, take pictures of my abs, been working out on them. And then, I don't even need to really worry about playing this game. It'll play itself. No, it's Mordekaiser. You got to actually do stuff, maybe dragon control, maybe we can get some objective play. You're already thinking in your head, wow, of course Mordekaiser's an exciting champion to pick. No, actually, I respect them because they allowed Brazil to get some experience on the world stage, whereas otherwise they would not have been able to. They didn't even qualify. But there you go, Mordekaiser. You guys got it. Hoi, hoi, hoi.
You know what? I'm actually going to say one last thing. I actually think that Gigabyte Marines were way ahead of their time. I think that they actually summoned the strength of the Mordekaiser so they could apply the ultimate to IMT. Now that they've been successfully killed from NALCS, this is just going to resurrect them in a few days. Riot's going to have a post, an announcement saying, you know what, we were just kidding, guys. Immortals are in. There you go. Gigabyte Marines, the saviors. All right.
What if Gigabyte Marines qualify for the NALCS?
I'm not even going to touch that.
I thought you were going to go in a completely different direction with that Mordekaiser bit versus Immortals. I thought you were going to be like, oh, yeah, Cody Sun actually playing 4 Gigabyte Marines on 4v6. It's a fun game mode that they added in for that. I don't know where you're going. Anyways, we've already halfway into this Group B discussion, so I figure we can just start with them. And we can even go in order of what is most funny. We can go Group B and then Group A and then Group D and then finish with Group C. And it's not because of the groups themselves, because then it spells out bad. All right, so Group B, we did have Longzhu coming out first. We both predicted Longzhu coming out first. So in this case, Totally fine. Makes it pretty reasonable. They won their group 6-0. Were they ever really threatened, do you think? Or was there any point of like people were saying, oh, cuz he's an inexperienced jungler, he's never been to a tournament like this, winning Korea is one thing, this is Worlds, maybe there's going to be some holes, they probably won't get exposed in groups, but maybe there's going to be something that hints at it. Like, do you think that there's anything that their opponents on the other side of the bracket, who we'll get to in a moment, are in their quarterfinal matchup, are actually going to be able to exploit, or any team in the future of the tournament, assuming they do make it past quarters? Do you think anybody will be able to exploit anything on them based on what they've shown in groups?
Honestly, I'm not too sure. If there are any weaknesses, let me put it this way. If there are any weaknesses to examine from Longzhu's perspective, then they would have to revisit the game that they played against Gigabyte Marines, right? And in this particular instance, this is where they would challenge the most, right? We saw up until from about let me see. So from about the 22-minute mark, Gigabyte Marines were in thorough control of the game. There was even a really close team fight where they came out victorious, completely wiping Longzhu. And I believe this occurred somewhere around, let me find it, somewhere around like 28 to 30 minutes, somewhere around basically 28 and a half, around an Infernal Drake, actually. And this was pretty interesting, considering they were ahead of the curve most of the time. At around 34 minutes, they were actually up 10.8k gold. Now, at 34 minutes, you're up basically 11k, and then by 42, you're even. So, I think this is a testament for exactly how strong Longzhu is, and if a team wants to see exactly what's messing with Longzhu, we'd have to examine that mid period of time and how they were set behind exactly. Admittedly, I had seen the games, but I didn't sit down to analyze and break down exactly what Gigabyte Marines did in order to offset any advantages that Longzhu could have potentially had, how they snowballed their own lead. But I think it had definitely a decent amount to do with the Zillion pick, which can stave off death. You had a lot of disengage in terms of like the Galio ultimate. You also had Syndra who could sweep out if Longzhu decided to pursue anyone at any point in time. If Xayah was around, she could potentially ult and then E and just stop all pursuers, things of this nature. And Gigabyte Marines actually did utilize these tools very effectively in that mid and slightly mid to late game period until they obviously sabotaged their own lead. But outside of this game, Longzhu looked largely indomitable. There were some early games that were mildly suspect. I believe there was one game against the Mortals where Mortals had a really good lead by the time it was 10, 15 minutes, but then it went to complete and utter shit. And I think this is just a testament to exactly how strong the individual players are, how well they can communicate, the veteran experience of Prey and Gorilla versus the mechanical prowess of literally every person on this team. While I do think Cuz is a little more of the aloof players that you'd more than likely catch him off guard than anyone else, I don't think it's a significant enough disadvantage for Longzhu for, say, like Samsung to exploit, or beyond that, whoever wins between WE and Cloud9 probably won't be able to exploit that. So I do think that Longzhu have a pretty clear shot all the way up until the finals. But that's my general synopsis on Longzhu's strengths and weaknesses, or perceivable weaknesses.
Right.
What do you think?
It's interesting because, I mean, you mentioned obviously the biggest deficit that they had the entire tournament was against Gigabyte Marines in their second game against them, and that was obviously due to plays that happened in the early game and throughout the early game. Samsung doesn't have an early game. I mean, not nearly as good as Longzhu's has been throughout the tournament. So if Longzhu are capable of coming back in the late game, then it may stand to reason that even if the game somehow did get dragged out against Samsung, they may actually still have a chance, or maybe even be the favorites to take a late game matchup in that sense. Although even despite the fact that Samsung is certainly like renowned for their late game prowess. I would say that from what I saw, I think indomitable is a great word to use for these guys. I mean, they're obviously Khan played. I was actually interested in seeing Khan because obviously everybody was on everybody was thinking Khan is like the player to watch. He's the MVP of the team, MVP of the finals where they dethroned SKT. You know, this is good stuff. We want to see more of Khan. I was waiting to see if he was legit, but it's not really something in retrospect, even regardless of his performance at Worlds, I think it would have actually been really bizarre if it hadn't been legit. Like, I don't know if any skepticism versus Khan was warranted at all. Like, unless the player has some mad nervousness issue where it's like, oh, I'm playing international, then maybe like on a bigger stage or a bigger, more prestigious event, then maybe you can understand it in that capacity. But I mean, Korea is the strongest region. They have been
Absolutely.
the strongest region. They have the reputation of being the strongest region. So to see like to have skepticism regarding another team, like, oh, Cody Sun, first Worlds,
Oh
he's
yeah.
in Worlds from NA. There's a weaker region, some of the Fnatic players were new to World stage. So
Mhm.
like you could see where, all right, yeah, it makes sense. Even Gigabyte Marines, especially, obviously the squad's first appearance at Worlds. So that makes sense to have some skepticism towards, are they going to perform at the same level or greater than what they performed all split, and how does that play into how our predictions are going to be? Do you actually predict them to not play to that standard? I actually predict games to go easier for Longzhu, probably until the finals or even including the finals, because I presume that most people would actually put them as favorites to win the whole tournament, or one of the teams that could very easily make that top one spot. It seems odd that you win Korea. This is the most
Uh,
prestigious region, and then you come to
yeah,
Worlds, and nobody's going to match a Korean team's prowess against another Korean team. Nobody's going to be able to do that, at least so far as we've seen. And the fact that the closest one to match them was a wild card team shows you that it's pretty difficult to play a traditional style versus them. And their quarterfinal opponents in Samsung, they're all about traditional style, playing towards the strengths of the meta. Their players can play all of the main champions that they need to play for the most part in order to play out the meta in its entirety as like a tier list or whatever, you
okay.
know. And as a result, I think that serves to favor Longzhu. There's not a single team that made it into the round of 8 that plays significantly off meta picks. Gigabyte Marines really was the only one in this entire tournament, I would argue, that plays off meta picks to a significant degree. Where it's that old saying where you've got the master swordsman. He doesn't need to fear the second best swordsman. He needs to fear the novice who's got no idea what the hell he's doing. Is going to try something unconventional, because that's the thing that's going to catch him off guard. It sounds like
Exactly.
Gigabyte Marines didn't know what they were doing, but it was similar approach. So I don't think any team can really challenge them until maybe the finals, depending on who makes it out. And we'll get to the playoff stage predictions as time goes on. But I think that's, unless you have anything to add, I think that's probably enough said about Longzhu in general. A really strong team. I would argue probably the strongest team in this tournament, as
More than
far
likely.
as what we've seen.
I think it's an easy top two in my opinion between
Mm-hmm.
SKT and Longzhu being the best teams at this tournament. But ultimately, I think well, it's hard because since we're on the topic of Korean teams, first of all, looking indomitable, but also being challenged in very weird ways, we have the concept of LMS coming into this entire tournament as a weaker region this time around, right? People even predicted that Flash Wolves, which would be the number one seed, the number one seed that clear 3-0 to AHQ, would still be presumably weak. And granted, we see how everything turned out now. So hindsight being 2020, they were last in their group, not before putting TSM in the position to not get out of the group, of course. But
Of course.
AHQ is the team that I wanted to jump over to because SKT didn't look indomitable against the weaker LMS team that remained. You know what I mean? So on the topic of Gigabyte Marines challenging Longzhu, AHQ challenged SKT twice and won once. So it was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. Their first game, which day was this? Give me a second. I'll get this day. All right, so it was day 3, and it was SKT versus AHQ. And throughout the entirety of this game, the gold roughly stayed plus or minus 1.5k for either team, or 2k, before SKT eventually did close out the game, largely off the back of a large fight around the, what is this, the Baron area, or Elder Drake? Elder Drake, it looks like. And they got a clean ace and then proceeded to close the game. And now what ended up happening here is Faker pulled out Fizz, which was an interesting pick because obviously it counters that Syndra. And ultimately, in the long run of the
Well,
game,
Look who he's fighting against.
Well, he was playing actually against Chawi, which is fine. The funny thing,
Oh, okay. I
but
didn't even see.
and here's the best part: the next time that they met up, which was just in I
Day
think
8
day
was the
8,
last day. Yeah.
HQ
Yeah, that's
wins, and it was off of the back of West Doors Fizz.
who would have
So
thought?
pretty interesting. You know what? At this point, HQ knew there was no way probably to get out of the group, right? So they wanted to play off with a bang. They didn't have a very strong. They don't have a very strong team compared to the rest of the individuals in their group, in my opinion. So they probably understood that the odds were slim and pulled out all the breaks. They know Westor is a signature player for them. They knew Fizz is a signature champion, and they banned out the Syndra because Faker can play the Syndra into Fizz. He's just that good mechanically where he can abuse the Fizz early, get a lead, and then never put himself in a position to be one shot or assassinated by Fizz, essentially. So they ban that out and force him onto another champion like Cassidy, who's very abusable early game, who can't really abuse Fizz as much in theory. So I just thought that this was really cool, and I wanted to give that honorable mention to AHQ, but more so just segue us into the fact that SKT was defeated by this type of a composition. You know what I'm saying? And this perceivably weak of a team.
There's a strategy that AHQ employed here that does involve the whole idea of playing off meta, which is the big thing though. And that's the I don't know that the other teams that remain will adapt in order to challenge these Korean opponents that are the best teams at playing the currently established professional meta.
Absolutely.
Even some Korean teams, as we saw the last Worlds with the whole support MF pick, needed something crazy off meta in order to challenge one another in certain instances, which we might see in the finals, presuming we get another Korea versus Korea finals. But since we're now halfway into Group A, I guess we'll just finish our assessment of that and then go to Group B and finish up there. So we're not spelling out bad anymore. But we'll go through. I think the Fizz. It was interesting because HQ wasn't at the worst of situations, especially after beating SKT in the first game of their group's second day.
Definitely.
Because they did beat EDG in the first game in their first matchup, and then EDG took them down later on. But there was still potentially some room for AHQ to make it out, and especially when you get to the point where you've toppled the hardest matchup that nobody would predict you to win. You beat them. People were expecting them. Maybe they do have a chance, especially if maybe Cloud9 falters, if they can repeat their success against EDG. But ironically, both of those games were the ones that were harder for them to win to the point where they were unsuccessful. So I just thought that was an interesting point to make. Certainly,
that is
a team that I think, obviously, not just through win-loss ratio, but also I think the spread of how much more challenging their opponents were on paper and as the games played out as we saw. I think AHQ actually were the better team of the two LMS teams.
It did ultimately feel like that, especially with how they did show up against SKT. And admittedly, the win against EDG, while impressive the first week, EDG obviously ended up going 0-3, so they were not in peak form. They even had the 10K gold lead against SKT, which they managed to, seed.
Yeah, Lucian, it's a crazy thing.
Scout's recklessness is a topic that I believe I brought up last time as just a fair warning, where it's kind of like live by Scout, die by Scout, which is why I was actually really happy with week 2, because it felt more like the team put many more resources into facilitating iBoy, and he decided, you know what, I'm not nervous anymore. He felt a lot less overly cautious. He still obviously respected his opponents, but he definitely showed a lot more mechanical prowess. And granted, we're in an ardent meta, so it's not like it's the hardest thing for an AD carry to kind of go in worry-free. But the difference between him, I would say week 1 to week 2, not necessarily night and day, but definitely a steep improvement.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was, again, nerves for him because he's really young and he's never played on this stage before. So it's always something we have to touch on when we have these rookie players or close to, inexperienced players playing on such a prestigious stage against some of the best teams in the world like Longzhu and SKT. But EDG did come in. I mean, I predicted them to get out ahead of C9. I think that there was, to me, a pretty strong argument that EDG should be able to come out ahead in the, in the head-to-head matchup against AHQ for sure, and then they faltered one game, and potentially even challenge SKT, and they sort of did with that first game that you were talking about against SKT. But I think they even were okay in the second game as well, but they weren't able to close out any leads or build upon any advantages after a certain point in the game when SKT started their insurmountable comeback. Just could not be stopped.
That plot armor is just too thick to crack through, you know?
Yeah. Well, speaking of plot armor, though, we did see Cloud9 make it out of this group in the second place. And you predicted them out. Obviously, last year, the same thing happened where both other NA teams failed to make it out. Even the prophesied TSM failed to make it out. And that was where it was just absolutely absurd. They were supposed to be the favorite to win that group. And, a lot of people predicted them to win this group even too. But with C9 making it out in lieu of Immortals and TSM, I guess we once again have to, especially this tournament, I think you can make the argument that with the group draw being like this, where Cloud9 actually have a harder group than TSM this time around, whereas previously the opposite was true last year, is C9 actually just a better international team, or is it coincidence based around group draw that has led to them making it out? Like, is it just because EDG weren't in peak form in their first couple of games, first couple of days of the tournament? Is it just because EDG went 0-3? Is it just because AHQ beat EDG early on, whereas if they hadn't, then they would have been tied and had to play a tiebreaker? Would they have gone out then? I mean, obviously we'll never know, but what's your opinion on Cloud9 in general, considering their international performance, the fact that they made quarters the previous Worlds, and now that they've done it again 2 Worlds in a row?
I think Cloud9 is a very interesting unit, primarily because every rendition of them that we've seen in some way just manages to adapt to the meta enough, or to the game enough, to thrive. Like last time we saw them, they had Meteos, if I'm not mistaken. And am I not mistaken? Was it not Meteos last time? I feel like there's this infamous Lee Sin 60-minute game against Flash Rose, right? All right. So yeah, they had like
Meteos. Contract's new, so this is his first year in Worlds.
That's right. He came in at the beginning of this year, I believe. Contracts. Yeah. So last time we saw them, it was a different playstyle, right? Because Meteos is not the early game influencer. That's not the type of jungler that he is. And that's why we have the memes about that 60-minute Lee Sin game and the one kick to end all games, But
yeah,
he insect them right out of the group. No, I'm kidding. But it seems like they just understand how to analyze their team as a unit, play to that strength, and if anything happens to kind of like upset their lead at a point where they're strong, stall out until they can find a perceivable weakness to potentially exploit. And granted, I don't think they're ever always good enough to exploit a weakness successfully, but they seem to know when an opportunity is knocking and to attempt to take it. Whether or not they get it successfully or not is absolutely different. In the circumstances of this group, though, I do think EDG being weak in the first week helped them. I do think the low expectations when it comes to AHQ played a huge factor in maybe how teams prepared against them, and therefore EDG was taken by surprise. Even SKT was contested a little bit. And this was, I don't know if it's a harsh wake-up call or if it's just teams like AHQ adapting over time, if Cloud9 was adapting efficiently over time. But it seems this rendition of Cloud9 specifically has a pretty solid early game and understanding of it. I think that the mechanical prowess that is offered by Jensen when he is not in a high intensity situation where he forgets to echo ult or something, I think that skill level that he brings oftentimes just outclasses his opponents, with the exception of Faker, obviously. But Faker, I think, is on a whole nother level or plateau as compared to many other League of Legends players. But Scout, who is often feast or famine, who is prone to doing the aggressive thing without complete knowledge, Jensen is less like that. He's calculated. Half the time he's being aggressive, that's because contracts can back him up. So I think that Cloud9 have this really core early game strategy. They also have a really good unit that emerges out of the laning phase. Like Sneaky in lane, everybody laughs at that lol, right? But Sneaky in the team context usually performs really well, particularly in team fights. So I think Cloud9 as a whole was always a contender for the second spot. And I posited my theory on Cloud9 being second, being reliant on EDG not having Clear Love show up. But it turns out it was a multitude of factors. AHQ surprised, EDG threw a huge lead that they had acquired on their own versus SKT. In the game against Cloud9 in the first week, we saw that iBoy, it felt to me, was overly cautious. There were a few team fights where big ultimates were expended by Cloud9 twice in that game, and he didn't abuse that. Even though him and maybe only one other person survived, members of Cloud9 were exceptionally low. They didn't have any more CC, and he, as Zaya, I believe he was in that game, could have easily moved forward to deal damage with no threat of CC. So it felt like he was overly cautious that first week, and it just felt like EDG snapped into form. Now, if EDG understood exactly what they wanted to do the first time around, maybe they didn't underestimate their opponent, maybe they didn't group up when when they had a 10k gold lead against an Oriana, Rakan, and a Twitch, because that doesn't make any sense personally. Maybe things would have been different. Cloud9 might have been forced into a tiebreaker, for which we could argue for days who might have came out the victor of
Yeah.
that tiebreaker. But I do think that the odds would have been stronger for EDG in that context, because like I said, Jensen under pressure is not the same as Jensen in low pressure games. But at the same time, it's not what happened. The reality was different. It seemed like Cloud9 was a little more prepared on the whole of the event. They didn't get taken back by AHQ like other teams did, SKT in the second week, EDG in the first. And ultimately, I just think they had more consistency overall. And that's ultimately what led to them getting out of the group entirely.
Okay. Is it notable that EDG, the second seed from China, did not make it out? Were they first?
Yeah, they beat RNG in the final 3-2.
Oh, that's right, because SKT was second seed.
Yeah.
Play with my head, Faker. Come on. But is it notable that the first seed from China failed to get out while the second and third seeds did? Or is that, again, is that based on EDG's performance more than it's based on the group draw being a stupid system? Because it is a stupid system.
I mean, we could definitely argue both ways. I think the group draw system could obviously be improved in a number of ways. I do also believe that EDG's personal performance was aloof at the moments where it needed to be very focused, like the 10k gold lead with SKT. I could keep repeating it because it's just so depressing to be up that much and lose the game. Just ask Gigabyte Marines against Longzhu, right?
Yeah.
But
similar stories.
It's hard to say because RNG definitely displayed a better format, even taking down the likes of like Samsung Galaxy and
They won their group.
Exactly. And against the Korean team, no less, right? They had the final boss there, and arguably Samsung Galaxy is the weaker of the three teams, right? But at the same time, if you're the number one seed out of China, you should be able to contend. Which actually brings us back to a point where I remember you wanted to talk about the parity in China and how the top four teams kind of won series against each other 3-2. It wasn't any big stomp anyway. So I think if EDG loses to someone like SKT, but RNG is strong enough to beat someone like Samsung Galaxy, I think since the parity is pretty even between these Chinese teams, that this kind of bodes well, actually, for RNG, for what I would eventually predict to be a semifinals against SKT. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I do think that since they're all close, the performance of EDG doesn't necessarily hold an enormous amount of weight on RNG and WE because RNG, this is the first time we've seen them in the group stage. EDG, same thing. But WE, we got to see how weak they looked in the play-in stage. Despite not dropping a game, they had many early games where they weren't actually ahead. They had many early games where it felt like they didn't have the tempo right away, but they would, through skilled macro, acquire their leads. And then,
well, especially against all of the teams that were so inexperienced compared to what they were normally playing against with their brothers in arms back in their region, which again they were so close with in terms of results. So typically, if you actually carried through that whole line of reasoning, you might have been worried for China in the onset, because if World Elite's so shaky, maybe that means that the other two teams from China with which they were very competitive might also be shaky. But I think that, I mean, you were about to make a point, so I don't mean to interrupt. But I think Royal wound up certainly becoming the most impressive of the three, in my opinion.
Whatever scrim blocks they've been setting up, whatever boot camp they've potentially used, I think it's worked magic for them. Because we didn't only get to see an RNG that is dominant in the early game for most of the tournament so far, but we also got to see them have very sound late game, which is kind of uncharacteristic because when people mention RNG, they note exactly how mechanically inclined they are. They note also how their early game is pretty much like it comes in like a hurricane, and they could just wipe the map with a lot of people early on. But they were able to contend with teams like Samsung Galaxy late, and admittedly they kind of faltered a little bit in I believe one of the games against Fenerbahce where it went a little late, but they edged out eventually. Um, which shows their resilience. Now, granted, this is Fenerbahce, and I believe they had a ton of issues when it comes to their mid to late game, closing out a game, and things of that nature. But I think it's still worth noting that they're able to hold out to a point to recognize a strength and exploit that opportunity. That's really the important thing for a lot of these teams, is that even when you're behind, if your team comp does not inherently have an advantage later on, forcing an opportunity on the map somewhere, whether it be around a neutral objective or having superior vision and catching somebody out getting a pick or something. And RNG just seemed pretty clean, even though they I wouldn't characterize them as having like great Baron control either coming out of the LPL, but they didn't have weaknesses around objectives here either. So I just think overall RNG came out looking much stronger than people might have predicted. But also, I wanted to commend initially WE because they did look shaky in a lot of their games in the playing stage, but they actually looked a lot better coming into the group stage, where like we said, the level of talent in the opposition is theoretically higher. So I think that this is just going to bode really well for WE and RNG alike moving on from this point in the tournament.
Yeah, World Elite did seem to rise to the occasion. Before we jump into the rest of those last two groups, let's just finalize our notes on Group A
Sure.
with EDG not rising to the occasion, doing the opposite of what World Elite did. With AHQ, I think they performed better than what we expected. I mean, they still did. They wound up tying with EDG, which was certainly more than I had expected they would do, especially
Yeah.
given how everybody was talking about Flash Wolves are probably last in their group despite being the first seed. And Flash Wolves beat AHQ handily in their regional finals, so you don't expect you expect even less of AHQ actually.
Absolutely.
I think they wound up rising to the occasion a little bit on their own end, and I'm glad that they made some of those Group A games competitive, especially taking down SKT is a very memorable moment. Obviously, taking down EDG early on made the group very interesting, and like we said, probably allowed Cloud9 to have a much higher chance of escaping the group as opposed to what might have happened had EDG and C9 wound up tying. But
Definitely.
it didn't come to pass, and SKT and Cloud9 will escape the group in first and second, respectively. Let's also finalize what we were talking about Group B earlier.
Definitely.
Since we were all over the place. Obviously, we talked at length about Longzhu, but Fnatic was the one to come out here. Like I think you mentioned earlier, the only team so far in Worlds to go 0-3 and still make it out of groups in the next day. So nice little run of form that they had at the end. Obviously heartbreaking for Immortals, who actually exit this group in last place, below Gigabyte Marines after a tiebreaker. There was a three-way tiebreaker, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Or a double-tiered tiebreaker where there had to be two of them, basically. So Fnatic exit the group 4-4 in wins and losses, but still wind up obviously being, even though it's only a 50% win-loss ratio, they still managed to get out of the group. I mean, they went from 0-3 to 4-4, which means that they played 5 games in the same day.
Yes.
Is that math right? And then they played 5 different games and won 4 of them. So that's pretty good. You got to commend it. It's sort of like, we talked about some of their players being a little new to the international stage, but you've got Soaz and Reckless, who have been in countless worlds at this point, plenty of their own regional finals and plenty of their own regional success. But obviously, they're some of the most storied players, especially Soaz, one of the oldest players. He's been in, he was in the World's final in season 1 for whatever that counts for. Not much, I would say, but still a stat you can pull out if you're in his fan club. And then you've got obviously he's been in however many quarters, however many semis. He's made it to Worlds just in general a lot of numerous times. And here he is in quarters once again, alongside Reckless, who's the other sort of experienced member on the team. I think it's certainly noteworthy that they went 0-3 and still managed to then make a desperate run for that second place finish under Longju.
Oh, and you know
Uh,
what? I gotta interject on that real quick because you did the math. You said it was 5 games, but let's point something out. They played 5 games that day. One was against Longju, and that was the one they lost. They had to play both Gigabyte Marines and Immortals twice that day and beat them both 2 times.
yeah,
So
that's pretty good.
that's pretty
That
good
I
proof that you
think that
deserve to be
makes. I mean,
second.
that's the thing is it's a hot run of form, right? They almost were sort of streaky, especially if you
Yeah,
consider the fact that beforehand they were basically not in the tournament at all. They were 0-3.
yeah.
So you come away from that to have the gusto to say, okay, we really fucked up here, guys. Let's turn it around now and not drop a single game against anybody not named Longshu. Let's win every single game that we play. We're going to have to do a whole bunch of tiebreakers, but we can make it out. We can still do it. I mean, most teams would be like 0-3. Wait, what are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Let's just vacation. That's what we're doing. G2 it up, man. And instead, they actually managed to escape, funnily enough, unlike G2. So you look at Fnatic, and I mean, I think you got to respect, especially now that you've brought that stat to my attention. They only lost one of the 5 games that they played. They only lost the one against Longju.
Yeah.
And basically playing a best of 3 against the other 2 teams and winning both rounds.
After
Sucks.
losing the first game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, even there, now you're 0-4. How do you go 4-4 afterwards? That's crazy. And I actually would have been really excited to see Gigabyte Marines make it out of this group. So
it would have been spicy.
It does sort of. I mean, if you look at what they drew, they would have drawn Royal, and I think that would actually be. They would have had, I think, a punching shot at dealing with Royal, because we talked about they seem very clean, but they also seem like a team that might revert back to their very aggressive, maybe reckless ways against a team like Gigabyte Marines, who can sort of bring other teams down to their level in a sense, or even below their level, as they in the first game when they beat Fnatic and they had that level 6 at like 5 minutes or something.
Oh, the Nocturne. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely destroyed Fnatic's bottom lane a couple of times. And I mean, that was just bonkers, and you don't expect that kind of stuff. And if they had plans, if they had enough strategies to pull out to go past group stage, you have to wonder what storylines we could be missing out on. But Fnatic managed to have a pretty good storyline of themselves. So is there anything we want to say on them before we move on to GAM and final words for Immortals for obviously more than just this tournament? They sort of need a little bit of love and support.
Honestly, when it comes down to it, I think Gigabyte Marines is probably, I would say they have the most entertaining factor, right? Because they showed the most stylistic diversity in terms of not only in-game strategy but also champ select. They were willing to draft Galio paired with a Rengar, and they also had a Zillion in the same game. They were willing to try the Mordekaiser strategy, even though it did not work to anywhere near a good effect. But the fact that they were willing to try these strategies to switch their mid laner like up top and put their ADC in the solo lane of mid in the shortest lane to avoid like gank potential and things like this. Like the fact that they're willing to try this means that the door is open to them in terms of what they could bring into a game, which I think could be very confusing for teams that are not able to adapt so quickly. Like I think it would have been great versus. I agree. If it would have been versus like RNG, that would have been a very interesting series. I do feel like RNG would have pulled out on top of it regardless.
Yeah, they would have been favorites for sure.
It just would have been a very fun series of games, and it would have forced RNG to test their ability to adapt as well. Like for instance, when they pulled out the Mordekaiser against Longju, Gigabyte Marines I'm talking about, we saw Longju did not waste time at level 3 to dive this Mordekaiser. They did not waste any time to punish it. I think Archie died 3 times on Mordekaiser in the span of about a minute and a half or something like that. Because he got dove under the tower, tried to teleport back, died again, and then tried to walk back to the lane where Longju members were waiting for him, and then died one more time. And it was
and then the
pretty
camera
upsetting.
panned over to his profile, and his player profile, and most players would be like, oh, shit, head in their hands as their third death. But Archie just pulls back his head, he reveals a skull. You can't kill what's already dead.
Yeah, right.
And then he ults himself, and somehow the game breaks. There's some way to segue that into an actual joke, but
I mean,
instead I
there's
just.
plenty of bugs with the Mordekaiser Ultimate
Oh yeah,
anyway,
there
so
you
you
go.
know
Yeah,
what? There you
the
go.
bug was in real life though. It actually had
Exactly.
a corpse playing their top lane, which is not un. I don't think that's unfair criticism of Gam, to be honest. A corpse in their
Honestly,
top lane, yeah, sure.
definitely not. Archie could have had better performances, but all things said and done, they showed up pretty well. I think Immortals is really the scary story in the sense that they were 2-1 after the first week, you know, and it's just heart wrenching to basically not only lose all three of your games, but then you lose the tiebreaker. And let's keep in
Yeah,
mind that one of the victories they had was off of the back of Reckless flashing forward as Twitch. You know what I mean? In the first week, like that was more off the back of Fnatic making a mistake as opposed to Immortals being one of the better teams. So even though people will look at
absolutely,
it
yeah,
and
for
say
sure.
2-1 Immortals, great first week, wasn't really a great first week. They were
It would
handed a
easily been
win.
1 and 2. Yeah, I mean, right. That was like one of the only mistakes. Everybody's said this plenty of times, but
Absolutely.
Reckless played pretty well that game, and then had that. Obviously, that was when I thought Fnatic were out of it for sure. I thought it was
Yeah.
like, oh, there's no way you can recover from that. And that's why I'm so impressed by their run back to that second place spot that I picked for them to get out. Yeah,
I
all
didn't.
me.
I'll admit my shame. All right. I had Immortals second. I had faith in North America. I don't know what I was thinking. You know, some evil
Apparently,
spirit
even
possessed
Riot
me.
doesn't have fate in fucking North America, dude. They're like, wait, G2 wants to maybe join NALCS? Get the fuck out of here, Immortals. You didn't even make it out of groups. Neither did G2. Doesn't matter. I like their owner. I don't know why they don't like Noah. Maybe it's just because he invested in Overwatch or something.
I don't know.
Lunatics.
But what do we know? Anyway, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah. What do we know? Well, what we do know is that Fnatic are now up against Royal Never Give Up that we mentioned earlier. Are a very clean team against Fnatic, who, as we talked about, is a little streaky. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully they can play at the best of their ability, at the same level of their ability in that they played in their second. Well, it's not even the second day, but the last day of their group where they played all 5 of those games. I mean, might actually go to the full mile of best of 5. We'll get to playoff predictions later on, but if Fnatic show up at the same level of play that they were in, I think that maybe it's not looking super grim for EU. I think maybe the at least one EU team might be able to make it to semis, but we're not sure yet. The last time Fnatic made semis was 2 Worlds ago, because the last Worlds they were conspicuously absent from the tournament. So
we don't like to remember those dark times. All right, we need to
Reckless
get past
doesn't
them.
either. Hopefully he keeps his mind on positive things, like my prediction of Group D. But we're not going to Group D. We're going to Group C.
All right.
Which is not a great segue, but here we are. We're here.
It was
Royal,
like that jolt. It's like you jolted us here. You kind of misled us a little bit. It's like you're veering right and then you turn a sharp left on the road, and we just suddenly ended up here. This is our destination.
And suddenly G2 were out of this group. Does it not infuriate you that G2 get the TSM group of last year? I mean, I think it's ludicrous that TSM had that group too. I mean, what a punishment. This is, again, first seed from China doesn't make it out.
Yep.
First seed from Taiwan doesn't make it out. First seed from NA doesn't make it out. First seed from Europe also doesn't make it out. Meanwhile, Fnatic and Misfits both make it out of their group. Spoiler alert for Group D. They made it out, and now we're looking at G2, the first seed. Yeah, they just weren't good enough. That's what it was.
Definitely not.
You can only play the teams that you're up against, but I do think that this really does expose the problems with the current World's group draw system, where I like the idea that you get the last seed based on performance from a play-in stage, but I do think that the other 12 teams that were seeded through this random system should probably be ranked like 1 to 12, and then we can figure that out, because I think it isn't unreasonable to say that the top 3 Korean teams are actually also the top 3 League of Legends teams in the entire world.
Yeah.
And if you're going to say that actually G2 is on par with Longzhu and 2 tiers above Samsung, I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Because as we saw in this tournament, they were supposed to be a tier above Royal as well. And I don't think any analyst would have ever put G2 above these two teams,
No,
or at least not both of them, certainly.
no, definitely not both of them. I think
Yeah.
weird about this group, and I think there's actually very little to say about Group C in the sense that people expected Royal to do really well. People expected Samsung to do really well. I think Samsung coming in was perceivably weaker than the other Korean teams. I do also feel like their late game with ambition, to be clear, because I don't think that Haru does very many benefits to the team at all. But
Yeah.
and ironically, I think Haru means like spring, and he almost brought Samsung into a state of winter and death and dying. But anyway, moving
Hey
on
man,
from
it's
that.
not spring anymore. And
Yeah.
spring split maybe, but why do you name yourself after a split? You're not even playing Worlds at fucking
He's got to change his name to Fall
Korean
or something.
sandbagging. They learned that from China.
Definitely. And honestly, I don't think many people would have said that RNG would come out on top. I think what's his name, Razzleplasm or something like that. A gentleman
Yeah.
who's an analyst or caster for LPL. He predicted RNG to come out on top. So you know what, kudos to him because he obviously knew something we did not. But I
Yeah,
think
we both predicted Samsung out first,
yeah,
and
you know what, I went
didn't happen.
primarily with the fact that Samsung Galaxy is normally good at stalling out a game, and they tend to have superior late game to even other LCK teams. Uh, but I guess it didn't really matter much if RNG was able to kind of hold on when it came to late game and also get early game leads. It didn't matter stylistically. And granted, this is a different rendition of RNG. Last year, they had Looper and Mata, I believe, or something of that nature. Then they
Yeah,
went to KT after Worlds or something. But well, Looper to Echo Fox, Mata to KT. But
different teams, very very different teams.
yeah. I'm sorry, speaking so
No,
fast, like my words were ahead of my thoughts. But um, like stylistically, it's not impossible to see that in hindsight. The level of play that RNG brought to the table was very high. Like I said, Samsung Galaxy compared to what you would normally expect from them were perceivably weaker. But G2 as a whole seemed a little lost. I didn't think they would have as superior a late game as Samsung Galaxy per se, but I thought that their early game would be a lot cleaner in comparison. I already displayed I had no hope for 1907 Fenerbahce, primarily because they almost had no redeeming qualities when it came to the mid to late game. They
especially compared to the field that they were slated to play against. It's funny
that's
too because we were talking about how maybe Turkey, alongside Brazil, is one of the obviously the late resurgence of Vietnam sort of outmodes that potentially. But Turkey and Brazil have been the highest performing regions at Worlds, with the exception of last year's Worlds with the CIS. Sort of,
yeah.
not sure if it was a fluke, not sure if it was really what the case was. They didn't make it to this Worlds, but obviously everybody remembers Albus Nox Luna beating.
Albus Nox actually the team as an organization transferred over to Russia, and then half of the players went to M19 and half of the players went to Gambit.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they were already in CIS. Unless you mean the actual team Albus Nox disbanded as an organization or something.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. That's the organization I think transitioned into M19, and half of
Okay.
the players went over to Gambit, and half of the players remained, or something like that.
That was a 3-2 finals for them too. I was surprised
Yeah.
Gambit didn't make it out of groups at all, or play-ins at all. But
Let's
I mean,
avoid that heartbreak.
Fenerbahce managed to make it out, and it seems like maybe you could argue slotting in a different team here might have. I mean, this is really a group of death, though. I don't think any of the wildcard teams, play-in teams, would have actually made a dent in this group. I mean, besides maybe World Elite, if World Elite had gotten slotted in here. But.
I mean, well, oh no, they couldn't though, because RNG.
Is that real? Even clans can't be slotted into
just because they're both Chinese teams.
Who designed this system? Get them.
They're supposed to do it so that like there's supposed to be some sort of equal representation from it. I don't know. That's just the rules. That's what they say. I'm not necessarily inclined for it, but like all right. So for this group, it's weird because you look at G2, they didn't even really have not a lot of analysts. Maybe less than half, generally speaking, predicted that G2 would have even a fighting chance for second. And if they weren't really heavily predicted to have a chance for second, there's no reason that like Fenerbahce or potentially another wild card team would have a chance to get out. Especially after what we saw from Fenerbahce, 1907 Fenerbahce, Jesus.
Don't say the whole name, please. Oh God!
I gotta say it every time. All right, every time in honor of them.
Yeah, in honor of Jack casting. 1907 Fenerbahce, 1907 Fenerbahce, 1907 Fenerbahce.
Please tell me
I've heard
somebody's
it.
made a video of that where they just cut out the clip of every caster saying 1907
I
Fenerbahce
would
and stitched it
probably,
together.
I would watch that video a few times.
It's
Probably.
like that Trump video where he's like China, 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 China.
Excellent. Yeah. Now it's just turkey, 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 and it's making me hungry.
But
You
speaking
put
of
turkey on
China,
short. You know what I mean?
fair enough,
With the
fair enough.
platter.
But you know what? Turkey's at the bottom and China was at the top, and Korea didn't look weak per se, but didn't emerge the victor, and so we were both
Yes.
wrong on that prediction. But
Right. Yeah. Well, it is interesting because I think it's notable. The one thing you can say about Group C, about from an analytical front regarding the Royal Samsung matchup is that Royal did have that perfect game against Samsung, and I think that
yes,
even though it's the second seed versus the third seed, we talked about that already. Just coming into this group's discussion, we talked about obviously the top three teams in the world appear to be, you could argue that they're all the top three Korean teams,
yeah,
and then maybe there's a Chinese team at fourth, or probably, especially based on what
presumably,
we've seen so far. But I think it is notable. It is noteworthy that even though it was the second versus the third seeds from the regions, that a Chinese team did perfect game a Korean team. That's not something you would expect. Although if you had to predict based on what was available, you wouldn't predict EDG perfect gaming SKT, and
no.
Team WE wasn't against a Korean team, so it would have had to be Royal versus Samsung. Samsung, the team renowned for having we'll say it nicely, a much better late game than they have an early game. Whereas Royal, obviously, almost the opposite. Despite what we saw here, they were typically fairly clean overall, with the exception of that Fenerbahce game that was probably related to them, I guess, under-preparing, you'd say. At that point, I don't think Fenerbahce had a fighting chance anyways, even if they magically
Nah.
perfect gamed a Korean team as well, which would never happen. But I think it is noteworthy, and I think that does give Royal an edge in their quarterfinal matchup and potentially a semifinal, depending on what the outcome is. So
I agree.
just some food for thought regarding that. I don't look at this group and it doesn't really puzzle me, the results. Unlike, the Fnatic was an upset after the first couple of days. Obviously Cloud9 making it through because of EDG's underperformance and AHQ's overperformance. There's like things that you couldn't really account for. This group actually played out as expected. With obviously we both voted Samsung above Royal, but if you told me you went back in time right after we finished the first episode of the show, I wouldn't have not believed you that Royal managed to edge out Samsung. It does make sense,
Definitely.
in based on the matchup. So that's probably all we need to say about Group C. And now we get to the group of memes.
I love this group because first of all, I had so many different ways of interpreting the strengths and weaknesses of teams. Initially, when WE was coming in and how weak that they looked, I had one prediction. Later on, I had another prediction. I changed my prediction so much, but you know what? Through the magic of pick'ems, my picks were locked in, and I got this group perfectly correct when it comes to pick'ems, which was my most recent update. But when we look back at the most recent, not the most recent, but at the last video that we did, my picks were definitely not the same. I definitely got them wrong last time. I think I had WE first and TSM second.
Yeah.
WE was first, but TSM. And can I just say something? I know he didn't steal a Baron, but I predicted Mischief when it came to Power of Evil having Oriana. And can we just talk about the fact that the tiebreaker match, TSM gave Power of Evil Oriana? Can we please just mention it? Just throw it out there.
They gave him LeBlanc in I think the first game.
Oh,
As well
jeez.
too, which was just disaster. The thing I don't really like. It might sound like I'm a lunatic when I say stuff like this, but I don't really think that TSM should have given much of a shit what Misfits drafted. I think they just shouldn't have drafted Ezreal with no engage and fucking Rise Jace. Like, goddamn. They should have really just focused. I don't know what was going on. I mean, we obviously Partha's left. Bjergsen complained about being overly focused as a scapegoat, and who's to say he's wrong about that? I mean, obviously there's been flame at this team, as you would expect, because they have the biggest fan base, and when they lost, everybody was disappointed, or
You know what?
gleeful. And
Speaking of Flame, just one more time, rest in peace, Immortals. We will see
oh
you
yeah,
again
yeah, we
sometime
forgot
in the
to
future.
give them a
No.
send off. There you go. See you later. Yeah, Flame said, "Huh?" or something like that on Twitter. That's
Honestly,
pretty.
but hold on, really quickly. Actually, with when it comes to Parth, he eventually tweeted again later that he sent that initial tweet in a state of emotion. So I don't know if he's actually officially removed or if he's officially leaving. It might not be the case, but
Oh,
we'll end up seeing one way or another because the off season's coming at the end of Worlds, and even before that, teams that are eliminated are probably going to start making moves anyway. So,
well, I mean, with Immortals being dismissed from the NALCS,
oh
we
man,
still don't really know if TSM is going to make it. It seems like a no-brainer, but
no, TSM
it
has
also
been
seemed like a
accepted.
no-brainer to keep Immortals. So I don't really know what the
TSM
fuck.
did get accepted. There are only so far when it
Oh,
comes to
they
that
are
franchising.
official.
Yeah, for the franchising, there's TSM, Cloud9, CLG, Team
Echo
Liquid,
Fox made it in.
Echo Fox is another one. There was a sixth, I feel like. I
Wasn't Dignitas? They did not
No,
make
they
it
did
in.
not. They got declined. Phoenix One got declined. Envy
Wow,
got declined.
no surprise there, not at all.
Maybe it was only the five have been confirmed, but there are two other people who
Who was
sources
the
say that got accepted in, which is
who was
Optic
what?
Gaming
What was the
and
other? Oh, Optic managed to make it in. Okay,
yeah,
what was
and
the other NA team that was in the split? This split. This is totally off topic, but we can just tunnel on this one for a second.
all right, let's
What
see.
was the other NALCS team? Because we just listed them up. You said CLG, TSM,
All right, so let me see if I can run through them.
C9.
TSM, C9, CLG, Immortals, right? So we got four. Echo Fox, Envy, right?
Phoenix One,
Phoenix One,
Team Liquid,
Team Liquid, Dignitas.
Dignitas. What was the 10th?
I feel like anytime I try to list off these teams, I always forget the 10th. And I could name the other one the next time I try to name the 10, and then I'll just forget the next 10th one.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll just look it up real quick.
all
Hold
right.
on.
So, while you look it up, though, let's meme a little bit about Group D until you find that,
Sure,
right?
go for it, man.
So, TSM, it's almost like you could say.
Flight Quest. That's who it was.
There you go. And ironically, they're the only one who hasn't been accepted or denied yet, or at least it hasn't been reported yet.
Well, they have backing with the big guys, so
Oh, they did end up getting backing?
they got backing a while ago. They're some. I mean, FlyQuest is such a dumb name, but they have
Yeah, I agree.
they're owned by like some, maybe the Team Bio has it.
I mean, without
They're
FlyQuest, though, how could you have names like Fly Balls,
I mean, Fly High was an obvious haha.
Oh, that's great.
They're no, they don't even have a listing of who owns them in the. I don't know. It was some like Warriors, I think.
Golden
Or maybe
State?
that was. Yeah, it was
Maybe?
Golden State Warriors. I think so.
I don't
It
remember.
might
I'm
have
just
been
thinking like I'm
like,
snowballing here, but
spitballing.
I was gonna say when it comes
You
to
know who is
TSM, by the
snowballing?
way. Wait, what?
So you meant spitballing.
Oh, yeah, there you
People
go.
who are snowballing are misfits. They're snowballing versus
That's
TSM.
true. That's absolutely true. It's funny you had that segue. I was gonna say actually, it's almost like TSM's chances to win were gone in a flash, or a lack of double lift using his flash. One of the
He
two
still has his
things.
flash, as Dash mentioned.
He's saving it for next Worlds.
Yeah.
I'm just.
That would be so fucking. Oh man, what a poor motherfucker double lift is, man.
I don't understand how to diagnose the issues with TSM because while inherently you could see performance issues from double lift, like not using the flash and Sven Skarin for oftentimes getting killed in the early game, or not seeming, it almost seems like he plays the game with like I want to say like 90% brain power, like of the available brain power that he has. So it's like while all the other people are giving it like 100 or 110%, it's almost like he's a little aloof sometimes. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know if it's TSM's like coaching staff or a personal philosophy where they kind of change their junglers into like this tank ward bot, which inherently shouldn't be a problem, right? You adapt with the meta. When there's carry junglers, you play the carry junglers, and if you can't play the tank jungler, get a second jungler. The best team in the world has two junglers for this express purpose of having different play styles and different champion pools. So why wouldn't you, as a team that wants to be the best, do something similar? There's no harm in it. There's no foul in it. There's no
no
reason.
talent. There's you can't actually get a
I
sub.
can't argue with that. But
hey, speaking of subs, where they already brought us up.
They had Mr. Raleigh.
Yeah.
And you would figure after
he had Flash. Why didn't he go on? God damn it! I just hire me instead. Fuck
Actually, it's my personal philosophy or belief that Mr. Raleigh should have took teleport. This way, as soon as Double Lift fucked up his flash, he could have just teleported onto the stage, got right into the seat, started playing the game for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like they had those hot swaps in the middle of one of those meme games that they had a long time ago. No, this is back when Double Lift wasn't even on TSM yet. So I'm referencing stuff that nobody even remembers.
It's all
What do you
good.
mean Double Lift wasn't always on TSM? Yeah.
It's all right. Most of the people who follow him anyway are like, wait, Double Lift? I followed him forever. They were fans of him when he was on CLG.
They were fans of him when he was on Epic Gamer. I was a fan of Double Lift before Double Lift was cool. So
You know what it is? I think, you know what? Double Lift never just shook off CLG. That's what it is. At the end of the day, like, first seed NA finishes third. That is truly counter logic, all right? How about that one? I'm just saying. But I really just didn't. Let me put it this way. I remember when we made the video, I said that I think WE, TSM, and I gave credence to the fact that there is variance there. There's potential for Misfits to come out second. By the time I made my pick'ems, which I locked the day before, I put Misfits second. Why? I literally can't tell you an analytical reason, and that sucks because I'm an analyst, but I just felt it in the core of my being that there's no way in hell that TSM, with having good expectations going in, will leave with the good results. There was something. Maybe I just had a connection with like the fourth dimension or something, dude. I can't even begin to.
Well, here's the thing.
Ah.
I predicted TSM wouldn't make it out because they were prone to tilt. Because if they don't win all three of the games in the first half of the group stage,
Yeah,
they're probably not getting out. It was what I said, and I said that I'm probably giving myself too much credit here. From retrospect, I probably said something closer to like they have it's pretty easy for them to lose multiple games in the first day or the first couple of days because it's easy for them to snowball losses. Like if it's harder for them to like stay afloat if they've already lost than it is for them to keep the momentum if they're already winning. And some teams aren't like that. Like that sounds like a no-brainer, but some teams, you know, maybe they just get a lucky streak or whatever. Maybe they just play better in one of the games. But TSM is certainly a team that I feel like is actually surprisingly emotional when you consider how long the squad has been around.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the solution to TSM woes are, because that's always going to be a question. Like now people are saying, is Bjergsen done? Like, is he even, you know, should he just retire now, or should he be like subbed out for somebody else, maybe to try and sort of do what the Piglet treatment happened on Team Liquid way back when he was subbed out for Keith.
This little piggy went home? No.
Yeah, sorry. Well, then he came back, and then he did go home. Forever. But you have TSM have all these potential problems, all these problems that we see exacerbated by this group. Brother Sven, Double Lift Flash. You know, you've got these problems. People obviously will meme about them or blow them out of proportion potentially, but I think they are issues that should be addressed. I think they are issues that weren't unknown to us before World's group stage came into play. And I don't think that these sorts of situations, these sorts of problems that TSM have, because they weren't new ones, it wasn't like something that was unforeseen. I feel like they should have been addressed, and I don't feel like they worked hard enough on addressing these issues. And we already know, based on past interviews with different players and different coaches and different regions, that TSM and North American teams in general don't seem to practice properly. They don't use practice in scrims in the best way possible. They play scrims to win as if they were tournament games in a similar sense. Maybe their behavior of the players is different, but their drafts are typically pretty close to what you would expect from a stage draft, from a stage game. And that gives other teams blueprints on how to beat you. Now, obviously, they weren't scrimming their group partners, most likely. But if you think about what they're doing, they're not trying out things that are maybe slightly more on the unconventional side. They're not trying to use experimental strategies that have not been tested yet in order to fix problems that they have observed. They're just trying to play standard, which means the way that they already play with the problems that they already have. And they're trying to like perfect that method, as opposed to, I think, as far as I can tell anyways, it seems like they didn't really gain much. They didn't evolve as a team from the boot camp that they did. It doesn't seem like they're really that much different from the TSM that beat Immortals 3-1 in the finals. It seems like they're pretty much the same team, whereas Misfits, market improvement, Team World Elite, had that issue with play-ins, but then they come in and they're much better, I would argue. They perform to a higher standard than they did when they were in China. And then Flash Wolves, they suck. So who gives a shit about them? But you get the idea where I was going with that before I realized I was referencing a team that went 1-5.
I mean, all right. Speaking of Flash Wolves, in all honesty, they played the biggest spoiler though. If they didn't win that game against TSM, one could argue that TSM would have left this group, right? But
Yeah, probably.
at the same time, where we're sitting here saying, hey, you know what, Flash Wolves, they played spoiler. At the same time, TSM played spoiler because they didn't beat Flash Wolves, the team that only had one win, which was against TSM. Like that's something that you shouldn't do. And like you're mentioning these points where Team over the course of the tournament had showed improvement, and you see Misfits who basically had a crappier season this last split, discounting playoffs. I mean regular split versus their spring, which was actually much better than their summer. And then they come into playoffs. They upset Fnatic. They upset UOL first, then Fnatic, I believe. Fnatic, who had one of the best splits. In fact, they were like 11-2 or some nonsense like that.
Yeah, I think they only lost to G2, or maybe only lost to G2 once or something.
It was like 3. Oh, you mean Fnatic in the regular? Okay,
that's what I mean. Yeah.
All right, because Misfits, they run up playoffs, they lose 3-0 to G2, but when they come into Worlds, they start contending. They had I think it was the perfect game against TSM, right? Somebody
it was 17-7 in that game that you were referencing. I don't know if anybody had a perfect game.
There's some game that like they went off. They went absolutely off. And near perfect game their opponent. Maybe it was against Flash Wolves.
That was probably against Flash Wolves, yeah.
I'm gonna go check that out actually. I'm gonna verify that. But I mean, when it comes down to it, TSM it felt like they had a failure to adapt, or at least a failure to execution properly. And maybe it is the same concept where it's like they were scrimming a little too much in one method, right? And they failed to actually
and they stagnated in that sense.
Yeah, it felt like they were very binary in that sense. And I mean, we could kind of break down multiple faceted issues that I feel like TSM might have. Like Bjergsen is the star player on this team, supposedly, and then it's like he's not doing enough aggressive things, enough proactive things. Sven Skaren is oftentimes giving up like first blood or something, and you have to wonder, like, at what point is this most touted team supposed to snap into shape and actually do something?
Yeah, when they exited groups, Reginald had an interview with Travis, and he said, I know it sounds like a broken record. Every time we come into Worlds, we promise to do well, and we always disappoint. And, I mean, whatever that does to you emotionally, at the end of the day, logically, you look at the situation, he's absolutely right. Every single time they've been to Worlds, they have disappointed. Season 5 Worlds with Origin and KT Rolster, they weren't supposed to get out of the group anyways. Obviously, Season 6 Worlds, they came back, they restructured, they were supposed to be the best NA team, best team NA had ever seen, best team from the region, don't make it out. Obviously here, they don't make it out either.
And by the way, we could say that's awkward timing too, right? Because they were the best that they ever were. They even contended with Immortals when they had the super strong roster in the normal split. Granted, that always faltered in the playoffs, so, the Hootie Rainover rendition.
Yeah.
But then they got the group with RNG and Samsung during a split where both RNG and Samsung were dominant. Samsung, who later went to be the runner-up world champions, So it's like that's a byproduct of, I think, bad luck for that particular split. So I have very minimal contentions for them. Not that they didn't have their issues, by the way, but I'm just saying that their issues probably they could have got out of another group in that instance, I think. But this year, there's no excuse. There's no final boss. There's no Korean team. You're still the first seed. You still have that same lineup that you had last year that was touted to be the best rendition of TSM. Even if the meta has changed since then, you would argue in theory that it is a better meta, that there are more roaming opportunities out of the mid lane, that there are more wombo combo combinations coming out of like the Jarvan and the Galio, and then you have the Ardent Sensor meta for Doublelift, who is mechanically supposedly the best ADC out of North America at least. You would argue circumstances were in their favor this time, and they didn't deliver. And I'm not going to harp on them much more because I feel like, by the way, I did check. It is the first time they played Flash Wolves in week 1. It was 12 kills to 0. So I guess it was a perfect game in terms of kills, but they did get some structure.
This is Misfits versus Flash Wolves?
Yeah. So Misfits got the perfect kill game against Flash Wolves in the first game.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
But
I think that TSM have been. I mean, we've talked about them at length here. Yeah. Understandably, they're the team with the most fans. They're the team that everybody wants to talk about, especially when they lose. But what does this mean for the future of the org and of the region? When one team is all that can ever get out, and they're never the first seed. This is not a bad group draw. You know that you can't
No,
really have the same. You don't have the same excuses coming from the last Worlds. You know, you
exactly.
have very, you know, the most you can say is Misfits overperformed.
Yeah,
That, well, fuck me. You can't just go, oh yeah, it's we lost because another team was better. No
basically.
shit. And that's the thing. I don't think we should harp too much on TSM's issues right now because it's not really our place to try and fix them since we don't work for the org. But
Basically.
Misfits themselves, I think, do deserve a lot of credit. I mean, Hans Sama, great 80 carry by all accounts. Power of Evil played like what Bjergsen should have played like from all accounts that we can see. Played how we expected or more in line with what expectations were for Bjergsen. Probably not like a top 10 player, I would say. Probably
Nah,
not quite proven just yet, but he'll
definitely
have
not.
more time for that. He'll have a shot against Faker himself later on. And, you know, I think Misfits played really well. We already talked about World Elite playing a lot better, or WE. I'm calling them World Elite just like I'm calling Fenerbahce. But, you know, obviously World Elite had a pretty decent run of form, 5-1, only losing to TSM, actually. Flash Wolves, I pretty much said all we need to say about them when I said they suck. Who gives a shit about them? They definitely do. And we referenced that anyways earlier when we were talking about AHQ. They really dropped the ball,
Yeah.
but they were also probably the weakest team here, as we should. It's not really unsurprising, or it is unsurprising. It's not really surprising. It's not an upset. Like TSM
Yeah.
losing here, I didn't predict them getting out, but a lot of people thought that they had a chance. I thought maybe they had a chance. I
Yeah.
just didn't think it was super likely. TSM losing in the fashion that they did as well, where it was close, that was more of an upset. I think Flash Wolves is sort of expected.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, all in all, I think Group D. Obviously, I got it completely correct for my predictions from the last
I
show. You only missed the TSM Misfits
I will. I'm gonna throw it
thing.
out there just to save my ego to some extent. My pick'ems was perfect for Group
Oh
D.
yeah.
All right, so the most recent update is up on par,
Wait,
dude.
yeah, well, you know, and like you said earlier, it was not based in analysis at all. So good job. Excellent pickup. But I think with us rounding out Group D, we talked. I
Yeah,
mean, I sang Misfits praises. I think they're a pretty decent team. They are legit.
yeah,
No, I don't know if they're legit to go enough to go up against SKT, but we can get there. World Elite, they seem pretty legit themselves.
yeah.
Um, and now with them having probably one of the easiest quarterfinal draws possible, or the easiest one I would argue possible.
Oh, World Elite.
Yeah, I
I
mean, it's
actually,
easiest overall when you look at all of the other second seeds that they could have played. I think Cloud9 is probably the weakest second seed coming out of groups.
I wonder.
But I mean, we could talk about how that
Yeah, yeah,
specific matchup will go. But I think World Elite, this is the best chance for World Elite to get out, just like it's probably the best chance for Cloud9 to get out into semis.
yeah.
But I mean, I think it's time probably to lay it down and talk about our predictions
All
for
right.
the playoffs
So,
here.
which quarterfinals do you want to start with? We could whichever one you want to pick, we'll go with. Because you know what,
Well, we
Cloud
just
Nine and WE is really contentious to me. So I feel like we could go from the bottom up if you want.
sure.
All right.
Whatever you
I
like. I'll
just
let you
am
open.
so happy with this. First of all, we could say I'm on Cloud Nine almost. All right. But no, Cloud Nine versus WE. Right. This is
Okay.
probably going to be the closest quarters in my opinion. And I say this only because Team WE, while they did adapt well over the course of the entirety of the tournament so far, I do still feel like their early game is not quite as potent, and Cloud9 seems to have their early game down packed. They also play really well around Jensen in that early game, and Impact knows generally how to play the lane as to not die. So maybe he's not top die this time around, but he's top won't die this time around. You know what I mean? So
Good.
I think
Good
the
job.
weakest portion, and the reason why I would say that the odds are in favor of WE, is they have a more superior late game. But on top of that, they also have the benefit of Mystic. Now, Mystic, I would say, is leagues above Sneaky. I think Mystic is one of the best 80 carries in the world. I think he would be easily a top five, not necessarily in the top three, but like a fourth or fifth slot. But this man is a mechanical monster. This guy plays around team fights really well. He's just very exploitable in the early game, which Cloud9 has the stronger early game. But if a game is not snowballed to complete and utter hell in favor of Cloud9, if they don't absolutely win a draft immaculately and then execute perfectly, I think WE wins any game that extends into 25, 30-minute territory and beyond, with the exception of if Cloud9, for whatever reason, have some sort of a better scaling composition. Basically, they need to outdraft WE in terms of late game to beat WE in the late game scenario. Other than that, I think WE outperformed 25 minutes forward. I think that Mystic is a stronger AD carry in terms of team fight, positioning, and reflexes. Not that Sneaky has shown any of his weaknesses or I guess trademark weaknesses here so far this Worlds, but I do think he is more susceptible to make errors than Mystic is in the mid to late game.
It's interesting that everybody who talks about C9 always talks about how Sneaky's like a favorable player, not a superstar necessarily, but I mean, not on the level of Jensen, but they always say that, oh, Sneaky's an asset to the team. I wonder if he's really suited to actually be like have the whole team built around him. And with this meta being really important to have a really strong ADC, it makes sense that you would want an AD carry who's comfortable being built around in that sense from a composition perspective. And I don't know if Sneaky's entirely set up for that properly here as a player and through his strengths. Like you talked about his trademark weaknesses. Obviously his laning phase hasn't been the best, certainly compared to Mystic. It doesn't seem like it's super favorable in terms of a lane matchup. Getting out of that early game laning matchup towards the mid game, I think I agree with your assessment that Mystic is overall a much better player in terms of team fighting, which is a big component in the Ardent Sensor meta. So the thing is, I don't really see any way besides the mid lane that where C9 has a lane advantage. I think that Impact 957 is a person who doesn't really fall in the sense like Alfari probably gave him the most trouble. Hanser probably gave him the most trouble, I guess, since that was the only time that they lost. But I don't know. It's something about 957 in general makes me think that he's already sort of been tested in a group with Alfari and Hanser in the top lane, as his opponents. I don't think Impact is better than either of those top laners on the average day. So I don't think that 957 will fail to neutralize anything coming out from C9's top lane.
Okay.
And did they bring Ray this time around to Worlds?
I don't think they even have any other subs, so I don't see why they wouldn't have him at least there. I think Ray was boot camping. I don't think he actually played in the group. I'm actually unsure. I don't think they've ever pulled them out in the group stage yet. But
maybe Ray could give him a run for his money because Ray is known as a more aggressive top laner than Impact. But with that sort of I think an intangible, it's hard to really quantify that. So definitely. I would say that World Elite comes out ahead in 4 out of 5 of the matchups, or goes even, right? With 957 going even with, I think Condi's better than Contracts. I think, obviously, I talked about Jensen being better than the opposition. That I think certainly is observable or something that you can put in Cloud9's favor. Give them one of the 5 lanes in their favor, but. Certainly the bottom lane is in favor of World Elite. The top lane it will be neutralized. There's not really going to be anything that comes of that, especially if it's a tank matchup. I think 957 will just be fine. And they play as a team a lot better, I think, in terms of team fights, as they showed in their group, which means that 957 will be more of an asset. And in general, I think World Elite will probably handily dispatch C9. I'll give C9 some variance to take one game. So I'll say World Elite 3-1.
Honestly, my general assessment is pretty similar. I think at best it's going to be a 3-1, obviously in favor of Team WE. I think that Contracts was in a group that didn't have particularly strong jungle counterparts. And what do we have? We have Mountain, Clearlove, who is not notably an aggressive jungler. And what do we have? Blank and Peanut. Admittedly, Peanut is aggressive, but
I don't think their games versus SKT were competitive anyways, though, is the thing.
That's
the
a
games where they
there.
found success, I don't think Cloud9, I think your assessment is correct there, where Cloud9's not really been tested from the jungle perspective super hard. And when they have, they've faltered.
Yeah, and I think Condi is definitely a jungler that exists in that top tier of junglers. He to WE is iconic in a similar fashion that Faker is iconic to SKT. And I think that in this situation where you do have the top laner in 957 who is not likely to get 1v1'd or can potentially outplay 2v1 dives. When you have somebody influential like Kandi around Shie and 957, and you have just generally the stronger lane, not the stronger laners, but the stronger players in freaking, I just said it, Mystic and Ben. Ultimately, I just don't see much for Chorus. Again, I give them a stronger late game. I think that C9 may have potential to play the early game a little bit better, but even then, it seems like WE has the ability to utilize teleport very efficiently, understands how to execute early game dives pretty efficiently, although it's not their specialty. They just know when to do it and when they can get away with it, and that's the important part. You don't have to do it every game to have a clear understanding of when the opportunity is there to take it, right? And again, I'm just not counting Cloud9 out because they do have the very observable strength in Jensen. I do think they have the stability of impact, and a sneaky out of lane is still something that merits a lot of talent, a lot of ability to execute on a high level, just not as high as Mystic. So 3-1 WE, fight me.
All right. Well, I am fighting you. We have the same prediction. Somebody else has to fight you in the comments.
Let's do it.
I think the thing is, she is no slouch either. And the thing about their team play to note is, I think World Elite, it makes sense to place them overall several tiers, maybe even above Cloud9, at least a clear tier above them in the team play department, which makes them that much more scary when they already have most of the lanes in advantageous positions. So where do you want to go from here? We've got Royal versus Fnatic we can talk about.
That's actually a pretty good starting point because if I had to look at all the other groups and see which ones to me feel like there's the most room for any sort of potential upset, this would be second after WEC9. And when I say second in terms of potential upset, I still think it's a slim margin. But I mean, if it's going to happen anywhere, it would potentially be there or here.
Yeah,
Fnatic,
absolutely.
we've already highlighted some inexperienced players, some veterans. Soaz and Reckless have both been on this world stage a few times, Soaz more than Reckless. And it's just quite interesting, the dynamics here, with Fnatic looking as streaky as they are, but obviously riding upward momentum. And I know people hate the concept of momentum, but I do think that morale has a very significant factor in terms of execution in game. So that's what I mean when I say momentum. Morale and how it translates into execution in game, performance in game, right? I do think that they're in a favorable mindset right now, having come back from literally what was last place into second in their group. And RNG is indomitable as they looked in their group. Fnatic is also an early game team. Now, granted, Caps probably executes a little more poorly because he tends to take very aggressive plays. And I don't want to say he disrespects his opponents on purpose, but it's very obvious. Like, for instance, I think there was a play where he flashed over the wall as Cassiopeia. I forget exactly which team he was versing. But he tried to force a play, and then a Fnatic got punished for this. And that was very disturbing because it was A, entirely unnecessary, and B, high risk for minimal reward. So the fact that he thinks he just like style on his opponents to this degree is I want to say humiliating to a degree. If he brings that sort of hubris into this series, Fnatic have a very clear weakness.
It might not even be hubris, though. It might actually just be inexperience, maybe nerves. Caps hasn't really been around for too long, I mean, I don't think he's nearly as strong as Xiaohu, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's not as strong of a laner as Xiaohu is, but I've been wrong before about Chinese mid laners. I mean, technically, Scout's not Chinese, but let's just hope for no mid Lucian. That's all I can say. Please.
How about this? I'll help substantiate the claim a little bit for you when it comes to Xiaohu. Through the multiple roster shifts that RNG had to suffer through their regular split, Xiaohu was consistently mid lane. Whether it was Uzi or another AD carry, resources to Xiaohu fluctuated. He got some more resources when Uzi was out of the lineup, some less when Uzi came back in. And he still performed consistently, constantly, and helped RNG carry through many victories over the course of this LPL summer split. Not to mention,
I think MLXG has really come into form this tournament as well.
He's definitely decreased the amount of variance he has in terms of his performance. Like he's not prone to do as many random plays that end up getting him killed. And what was it exactly? Who were they against? I think it was actually against Samsung at one of the games where they were in. He went to do an invade, I believe, against Ambition, who was on like Sejuani or something. And Ambition, knowing that he would want to MLXG would want to take the aggressive invade, hid in a bush across from the red buff. They were blue side Samsung Galaxy. So you have MLXG come in. He goes to the red buff. He sees that it's up, and he's thinking to himself, "Wait, by the time Sejuani would path here, she would be on this right now." So he walks up, checks the Raptors, they're there, walks down, checks the Krugs, they're there, and immediately goes right for the bush. Ambition is in. This guy, he's displayed across these games a certain level of just intuitiveness. He didn't assume that Ambition wasn't there. He checked to see where he was. He didn't make any basically he applied brain power, and that's exactly what you need. You need to analyze your circumstances and then act accordingly, as opposed to just assume, hey, you know what, they're not here, let me just do this. Let me just do this absent-minded course of action without doing any sort of study. He definitely showed the ability to read the map, study, check for the information, and then act in accordance with that. Where is he if he's not at these three camps? Probably waiting for me. So let's see if he's in door number 1, and there he was. And I got to give them credit because they're playing in a very they have a lot of tactical, I guess, approaches to their games now. It's not just like this mindless aggressive early game. It's calculated aggression. They're looking at their avenues, seeing exactly what they could exploit, bust open the early game, and if not, they actually perform this mid to late game a lot better than I had initially expected when they were coming into Worlds. So for that reason alone, and like I said, Fnatic early game team, right?
Right.
But the inexperience of players like Caps, and I think Broxa, especially in light of a lot of the information Wicked has been putting forward in a lot of his interviews, how he says he knows Broxa, and Broxa is technically like a nervous player, so under pressure it could potentially affect him. I do think against the likes of MLXG and things like this, RNG have clear favorites in terms of just raw stability in the game, not influenced by nerves or pressure. When it comes to Yahoo, when it comes to MLXG, I think Let Me is probably the biggest variable. I think Ming has performed just incredibly alongside Uzi, who Uzi has shown that he's not prone to do any of this hyper aggressive bullcrap that he could potentially get abused for at all, which is something that we could credit like Mystic being a great ADC. We expect him to do something like that. But Uzi has shown he's able to kind of resist that urge, temper his own aggression, and kind of just wait for the opportunity to abuse the opponent in a more sophisticated manner as to not expose himself to any sort of potential weakness or counter aggression. So I would say that in this instance, I think RNG gets this one pretty handedly. I would say like 85-15, maybe 80-20.
Well, we're not in the business of of percentages here. What are you saying? 3 what? 3-1, 3-0?
I wouldn't be all right. So this is gonna sound weird. I'm gonna give it my final answer is gonna be 3-0. But
Okay.
if there is a 3-1, I would not be surprised. I'll put it that way.
See, the thing is, I think that this is more of a disparate matchup than Team World Elite versus Cloud9.
Okay.
By a pretty big degree. I think Fnatic with Reckless, I mean, that's pretty much their strongest lane. Soaz isn't a slouch, but we saw from the first couple of days prone to tilt, not prone to Twitter. You know, not a very like stable player, which is the opposite of what you would want or expect from a player who's been around forever and who's seen it all. He still has some sort of a hothead issue going on. I think if a Royal comes out ahead in the first couple of just in the first couple of games or the first game itself, that can probably start a pretty big downward spiral. Brox is nervous, Caps is quiet, or not. Who's quiet? It wasn't Caps. Was it Caps?
I am unsure.
I think Caps is the one who is actually doing decent, pretty vocal. I think Broxa was both of them. He was nervous and quiet.
Okay.
But you look at Soaz, like how do top laners lose games? Not like they did. It's not like it's their fault, but either it's their fault, they sucked in lane, or they were out of position, or whatever. Or, which is obviously, I played horribly. Time to tilt. Or they could do nothing and their team died around them. Time to tilt. That doesn't really lend itself to you have to be a patient person to play top lane if you're going to play a top lane tank. If you're not the options aren't really in your hands in order to like actually how to win, like if you can't express your own skill because you're being forced onto a utility tank pick, Soaz has been in this position numerous times,
Yeah.
and he very clearly doesn't like being in this position. So with Royal being a stronger team, just like World Elite is a stronger team than Cloud9, it's pretty clear, I think, that Royal will probably, I think they'll just sweep this just because they have, Fnatic may have some momentum. I think Royal has more momentum. They have enough strength as a team to stop them in their tracks. And there's momentum in the reverse side as soon as Fnatic loses one game.
Yeah, I
At
see what
least
you're
as
saying.
far as I can tell. Because even if some of the other players don't tilt, I think Soaz is that linchpin. If he's got his head in the game and he's not tilting at all, maybe they can take a game or two. But I don't think even if they're all playing at peak performance, Royal has to make more mistakes that would be uncharacteristic of them as a team in order to lose this series. This is Royal's
Definitely.
series to lose by a huge margin. And I'm also going to predict 3-0 just because of that.
All right. I do want to highlight, like you mentioned, though, I think a lot of it's going to rely on Fnatic draft and then game plan. Because if they do put Soaz on what everyone is calling dog champs, then they need to at least have Broxa, when he's pathing top side, to offer some sort of support, whether it be vision or just general pressure, something to facilitate that. And if not, then they need to reconsider their draft priority. Because if Soaz is hung out to dry, we saw what ended up happening when he was set really far behind. I think it was the Gigabyte Marine game? Where,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
he was pretty far behind at that point. I mean, the whole team
He
was.
didn't,
That,
but I mean, the problem with him being behind in that game on a tank specifically is that he didn't get the gold to get the stats to soak damage. So whenever a team fight broke out, he was deleted just as easily as a carry was. So that's why I think Fnatic really have to consider their priority in game when it comes to draft and then strategy to support that draft in the game.
I don't know if they're actually going to. I don't know if there are enough strategies in the playbook.
Well, I mean, we're
Honestly,
gonna find out one way or another, but we
yeah.
both think that RNG is gonna win it pretty handedly. So I mean, good luck, Fnatic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, our word is law. So now Fnatic have been doomed.
But now that we
Uh,
saved our Lord and Saviors of League of Legends for last, all the brackets that have Korean teams in them,
Absolutely. I mean, I guess we could just start with the SK Telecom series. You did say Lord and Savior. I don't know about Savior. Faker's more of a taker than he is a giver. He's
That's true.
he's the kind of guy who takes and doesn't give anything back. He's really selfish in that sense. He's not let anybody. I mean, well, to be fair, he did give Easy Hoon a couple of tries, and then he gave Scout a couple of tries, but they all went to China and backstabbed him, and now he's
Yeah.
sitting alone on his throne. He's not allowing anybody else to take the reins, and for good damn reason. He is, after all, the most storied player in the world, potentially. Yeah. I think the best player overall the game has seen, but potentially still the best player. The thing is, this meta isn't super suited for mid lane domination, especially when you're up against Power of Evil, who has shown that he's pretty decent in the mid lane, in terms of holding on when he's supposedly outclassed. I think PoE could take it to Faker, at least in this sense, in the sense of not, I spoke at length about in the last video where, okay, the last episode I talked about Faker being somebody who you try your best to not lose too much to,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying your best to apprehend and one up him. You just tried not to. You try to control the damage. It's not like you're trying to avoid it. You're just trying to control it.
Yeah.
And if you're plugging holes in the ship already, I mean, I don't think Misfits really have to worry about that as much. But it also depends on the jungle matchup, because Max Thor has been pretty decent, I thought, this tournament. And in general, he's been pretty all right overall in his region. And with Alfari being able, I would actually argue, I think you can make an argument anyways, that Alfari is a better top laner than Huni. But at the very least, I don't think Alfari will budge too much to Huni, whereas that hasn't really been the case for the rest of the field,
That's fair.
So maybe Misfits has a shot at destabilizing some early game stuff. But SKT's a Korean team, and Korean teams typically have decent late game. And I don't know that even if Misfits get ahead in many of the games that they'd be able to close it out, because you remember back in Worlds of last year, H2K made it to semis and got clean swept by Samsung after getting
Yeah.
some pretty decent advantages in the early games of those particular of that particular series. So I don't know that Misfits really has much of a shot here at anything other than a 3-0 loss. You know,
Yeah.
SKT being the people coming out ahead. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this estimation? Do you think that it's accurate, or do you think that Misfits has more of a chance than I'm giving them credit for?
I think in an ideal world, Misfits might have a chance, but in a realistic one, I don't think that they do by any stretch of the imagination. And the reason I say that is because the best matchup that I think Misfits have when it comes to SKT specifically is the Alphari Huni matchup, and this is a meta for bot laners anyway, so we could almost argue that that doesn't even matter. I think Huni's skill ceiling is higher than Alphari's, but I think Alphari's consistency is far more reliable than Huni's performances will be.
Yeah, I
I
would agree with that.
I don't know exactly how much that would matter if they give like Huni a Cho'Gath or something. Maybe they could therefore draft something to allow Alfari to abuse
Yeah.
Huni and keep him out of the game in the same style that Soaz was kept out of a lot of the games in his group.
Yeah. I mean, you could just hand him Jace if he's against the Cho'Gath, but
We know he has the mechanical
it's
prowess to do that too.
yeah. I mean, the thing is, it is difficult if SKT is aware of that potential weakness in their
Yeah.
ranks. They can draft around that and try and neutralize that as much as possible just from the draft. We all know that SKT's got pretty good handles on the draft and have historically anyway. So
Absolutely.
I don't think that the thing is, the coach of Misfits is going to have a fucking field day with the series trying to. He's got his work cut out for him, man. Really has to try his damnedest to figure out a way to one-up Coma. And
yeah,
oh man, that's no easy task.
I mean, think about it this way: he has to deal with strategy on two different levels. First of all, not only is he trying to one-up Coma, but he's also trying to figure out two separate strategies on any event that it is either blank or peanut.
Yeah.
Which would entirely affect how SKT play the game anyway. So this is going to be a very interesting. See, that's why I think all the advantages really go to SKT beyond arguably the top lane matchup. I think Hansama and Ignar, while they're mechanically gifted, I think they're untested internationally, obviously, despite how I would say how well they performed in the boot camp, because they did end up at least achieving masters, both of them. One of them ended up in challenger, the other one I don't think played as many games, but I don't remember which is which. But I know that they were both at least masters. I know that they have the mechanics to them. We saw Hansama go from week 1 doing well to week 2 going Super Saiyan. And then Power of Evil, like you said, I think he could contend with the best of the best in lane. I don't know how it would be out of lane. I think Faker probably has, in at least 8 times out of 10, 4 times out of 5, I guess, a better idea of how to influence the map versus Power of Evil.
It's just super hard to go against all of the practice the Koreans have had, all the practice that they've had with the meta, with playing as a team, with playing as a unit. Misfits is still a very young org in general. Power of Evil, not a young player individually, but hasn't been with a squad for very long. So that's the thing, is you have to constantly be weighing that as a potential issue. And I can't in good faith give Misfits more than like one game, and I think even that would be noteworthy if they managed to win one. I'll go ahead and predict SKT win 3-1 just because I think Misfits have some character to them. I think that they're young kids with a bright future. They can take it on. They can take on the world and lose, but at least lose with getting a score on the board, which is more than Fnatic will probably do, as we've discussed. So I don't know what you have in mind in particular, but I definitely think SKT, just in general, they've got the name recognition for you to vote for them. They've got the players, and they've got the cohesive team strategy. Like, they don't, besides Huni, there's never anything that's a disadvantage for them in terms of an individual player perspective. And it's sort of like, I'm sort of echoing what I talked about when I said Royal versus Fnatic. They're just overall a better cohesive team, a more cohesive team, a better team overall, playing as a unit, playing around these team fights, playing around these objectives, figuring out where their power spikes are, delaying if they need to. I mean, think of all the different teams that SKT's faced, and all of the different bad early games or where they've let something in the early game run away with them. They don't ever let that actually. It's very rare when you see a team beat SKT in the first place, which is why it's so notable when it happens. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about AHQ beating them like it was some unexplainable, fluke or act of God or something. I mean, it really was unprecedented, and that's the whole point. So I don't think Misfits will be able to do much else than maybe getting 3-1 in a series. I mean, best of five,
Yeah.
it's rough to expect a lot from a young lineup, but I think they can do at least that.
Honestly, see, it's so odd because of the group draws, ultimately resulting in pretty obvious outcomes, I think. Like it's definitely an upset if Misfits win a series against SKT, let
Absolutely.
alone win a game. Same thing for Fnatic versus Royal, and I think to a slightly less degree, but still an upset, C9 versus WE. Um,
Yeah, it has to be said that is C9's best chance of getting to semis. I just don't
oh,
think it'll happen.
if they got any other team, they would have had zero hope, guaranteed.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want to say something similar. I want to say 3-1 because I do think that Misfits, coincidentally, they're a rabbit. I think they could pull a rabbit out of a hat. I think they got a magic trick or two in here, and I'm gonna say it concretely, 3-1 in favor of SKT. I do think Misfits can take a game off of them, especially if SKT manages to field Peanut. As long as they don't draft a disadvantageous jungle matchup specifically where Peanut could abuse Maxlore, I do think Maxlore has the presence of mind, is oftentimes very strategic in the game and supportive of his allies who are all mechanically skilled. So I do think that this team cohesion is very strong. And like Peanut and Huni are both weaknesses perceivably to me. It's just that SKT could just sub in blank whenever Peanut looks weak. So I do think if there's ever the combination of Huni and Peanut, and there isn't a very clear, concise strategy out of SKT as to how to manipulate that or how to execute that, I do see Misfits taking at least one game. Um, Obviously, I'm going to do the same thing with my last prediction. I'm going to say I'm not going to be surprised if it's 3-0, but I want to give Misfits more credit for their mechanical prowess and their ability to act as a unit, even though they're against a stronger unit, even though they're against a stronger coach. I do think that they have the potential it takes to at least take the one game.
Fair enough. I think we're probably being a little more than fair to Misfits, but like we've all said, I don't think it's really unjustified. I think based on their group performance and also the ceiling that this lineup has, you can't expect them to make it to semis, but I think you can expect them to, presuming that they don't make any roster changes, I think you can expect them to be pretty strong next season.
I would have to agree.
Let's go on to the final one. Longzhu Gaming versus Samsung Galaxy.
My favorite, my absolute favorite, and I know I was hyped about like C9WE, but that's because I feel like that's the group with the highest chance of upset. And this is going to sound like an egregious prediction. I'm opening up with the prediction. Longzhu 3-0 Samsung Galaxy off the
Fuck,
bat.
you stole it from me. I was going to say the same thing.
All right.
There's absolutely, I mean, last time we were like button heads about all these different things. No, TSM's trash. They're not getting out. And you're like, no, they'll be fine. They can make it. No, this time we're just exactly the same predictions, exactly the same win-loss rate record for these teams too.
I think it's a little crazy. It's unfair that there's nothing to really have contention over, I guess. It doesn't have any drama for anybody who's potentially tuning in, but at the same time, like I said, these drawings just look so favorable for one team in each matchup, right? Like we could argue that if all these predictions go the way that we want, then the semis are going to be amazing. But in the quarters, it just looks one-sided. Because all right, let's look at it from a realistic perspective, right? Longzhu obviously has some of the best early game potential out of any team at Worlds, and Samsung Galaxy is notably a very weak early game team. Now, granted, they like to scale. Sometimes they'll just wait for that late game. They'll have such great team cohesion and execution.
They do like to stall out, yeah.
They're masters at it, right? And normally that works because they can just take the late game. They'll have a composition that might function better, or even if they don't, they know how to execute around the map. They know how to utilize a neutral objective to force an opponent to bait out the teleport and then operate with teleport advantage, and then just kind of abuse the map with that. But Longzhu, they're no slouches. They don't waste a second. They know how to play to any win condition that they select, whether it be they're drafting something that's more centered around prey, if they have a tank in the top lane, which is not, admittedly, kind of rare, but their team is so diverse strategically. You can have any of their members on any champion, and admittedly, now that I'm thinking about it, actually, a lot of their primary picks are not often contested. I think Cuz has gotten Gragas more times than I can remember. We've also seen him, I think, play like a Jarvan in one of the games, or maybe it was Khan that whipped out the Jarvan. I'm unsure actually. I'm gonna have to look at that, but they have shown
Well,
a.
the thing is, I mean, I think teams honestly just look at this team and they go, "What can we even do in the draft?"
It feels so awkward because they just execute. What happens if you take Jace from Khan? He'll probably just play Renekton and do the same thing to you anyway. He has options. Like Gnar could still abuse somebody in a lane. Jarvan could still abuse somebody in a lane. Cuz is always given some sort of influential pick that he could jungle on, like the Gragas. Uh, and BDD is just this monster that he can just play anything and play it for the team. Even in the finals, when they were playing in the LCK finals and they were playing against SKT, BDD was, I think he only played Orianna and Talia, maybe. I don't think they let him get his hands on Galio. But the point being is, even though he was on Orianna in like 2 of the games, he wasn't outright beating Faker in lane, but he wasn't dying to Faker either. And Longzhu coordinated a strategy where BDD would roam. He would give up CS sometimes to Faker, who is, the unkillable Demon King, just to 3-man roam top with the jungler and with Khan to dive Huni and set him behind. They would donate that many resources to make Huni so incapable of bouncing back to get that first tower potentially in the top lane most of the time. They know how to operate a strength and a weakness and how to execute it at any point. They are a team that executed level 3 dives against the likes of Gigabyte Marines just in groups, Immortals as well, I believe. They are no slouches to the early game. They know how to abuse their pressure. And when they get a lead, they're like, if anybody has paid attention to LCK, you know how KT Rolster would get an early lead and then have no idea what to do in the mid to late game. Yeah, Longzhu is like the hybrid of KT Rolster's early game and Samsung Galaxy's mid to late game. They just know what to do at every stage of the game, and they haven't been contested in a way that has forced them into complete and utter discomfort. And like I mentioned before, the closest we've seen is like the Gigabyte Marine series, where a whole bunch of shenanigans and off meta picks were taken, like the Rengar, and the Galio obviously synergizes with that, and then like the Zillion. So I mean, unless somebody's got some off the kilter strategy coming in, I don't really see anybody slaying these dragons. All right.
Hey man, support misfortune. Let's go. Once again, let's just do it up. Let's call it here. I mean, the last time it came out, it was 2 Korean teams against each other, right? So,
But it had to be for the Zyra though, or the Malzahar too. It was effective against both.
yeah.
So I
Well,
mean, I
neither of
don't.
those are playing. What's a counter to Lulu in lane?
Um, what was Lulu countered Malzahar? I
I
think
mean, what counters Lulu?
I was trying to think about it by going the reverse way first and then eliminating champions that way. But I think hyper aggressive champions are actually really good against Lulu, or at least in that point in the meta.
So support Fiora. It's coming, guys. Predicted right here. Longzhu will pull it out just to screw with Samsung. I don't know. They'll just style on. I think Longzhu really at this point they're the best team in the world. They
Yeah,
proved that when they beat SKT in the regional finals. They proved that when they went 6-0, and the closest any team came to beating them was some wild card team from bumfuck Alabama. I mean, get them out of here. You got Longzhu Gaming. They are the best team in the world. Calling it right here. They're going to win the whole thing, and they're definitely going to sweep this 3-0. The thing is, though, Longzhu, if they were to be tested by any team, it wouldn't be Samsung. That's the thing. Actually, I think any other team in this entire, besides Cloud9, I guess, every other team besides Samsung and Cloud9 have a better chance of testing Longzhu in some capacity. Fnatic already tried and failed, so I guess you can write them out of the picture too.
yeah.
But
I think
Misfits,
RNG,
I think, could have done something. RNG could do something. SKT
yeah,
could do something, but Samsung can't. They can only
no,
do stuff in the late game. That's where Longzhu never go, really, because they already won the game at that point. So I don't know. It's really rough to try and figure out a way to make that work if you're Samsung. And it might seem crazy. Like you said, it sounds egregious, but I think calling it Longzhu 3-0, it's not because Samsung are a bad team. It's because Longzhu are that good.
yes.
And also because of the stylistic mismatch that exists between these two teams in particular. So,
I mean, we could even look at it within reason, right? I mean, Longzhu, we know, took their sub top laner because they gave him some playtime in the group, I believe, Rascal. And Samsung have Haru, and the thing that's really bad about that is I don't think Haru is strong enough. Like, the purpose of Haru is basically he increases or bolsters Samsung's early game, right? But that's also trading off Ambition's really long career in League of Legends experience and his shot calling for the mid to late game, even in the early game, to stop disadvantages from snowballing against them. I think in the long con, Ambition is the better option in this series. If you sub in Haru, maybe you'll have a better early game compared to what you would normally have. But against Longzhu, that's probably not gonna matter because it's like a well-oiled machine versus a mechanically gifted machine, but admittedly bad at shot calling if they don't have ambition. So it's like, even if you did have potential to get an early lead, how are you going to do that against a team that's equivalent, if not better, in the early game? And they still have their shot callers in their veterans praying gorilla. You know what I'm saying? So it's like there are few advantages that are perceivable here. At best, I think Samsung, they put in ambition. They draft for the long con, things that can't be abused too much early, things that'll scale in the late game, and just hope that Longzhu don't outplay them in the late game. And I think Longzhu have every tool, every mechanic in their player, each player, to just handedly beat Samsung at any stage of the game. Literally any stage of the game.
That's the thing, though, is that Longzhu is just so head and shoulders above pretty much every team besides SKT
Yeah.
at this tournament. I don't think you can count on Samsung to, again, even score a game win in this series. Maybe we'll be taken by surprise here by Samsung, but I wouldn't even really account for much variance here. I don't think that Samsung could ever, like, this is as much of a indomitable, insurmountable task for Samsung as Cloud9 versus SKT would be. You know, like it really does feel like it's that crazy or comparable enough to say that there's no reason to predict Samsung winning ever. So I think it's pretty easy to just wash our hands of this weirdness at this point. That's probably what we can end on. Longzhu 3-0ing. You've got our predictions for everything else. We'll keep track of them here. And when we return, unless you have any final words.
Honestly, I was just going to make a really bad joke about calling that quarterfinal the Aurelion Soul matchup because it's Samsung Galaxy versus Longzhu and their Dragon. But you know what? I'll save it.
Why did I even ask
Pretend
you
that I didn't say it.
Jeez, I mean, come on. This has been League of Our Own. We'll be back. I don't know, whenever these playoffs go through and we see the quarterfinals over, we will once again attempt to wreck each other at our incorrect predictions. But except this time we all have the same predictions, so we'll be wrecking ourselves individually as opposed to one another. But hey, at least this time we really can laugh at Cloud9 when they inevitably shit the bed. Because there's no way they're beating World Elite. So,
nah.
There you go.
All right.